Hello and welcome. The goal of this podcast is to get listeners connected with others in the sports industry because they say it's all about who you know, and now you know us. I welcome everybody to the Constant Sports Podcast, a show that is committed to connecting you with the movers and shakers in the sports industry. And I'm your host, Connor Shank, and today we have Tariq Ahmad. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Connor. How are you doing?
Doing good, doing good. And, big guest here. He's a leading figure in the world of sports, management, NIL, professor, athlete representation, with a keen focus, you could say, on name, image, and likeness. And so we're excited to kind of jam in that space today with the NIL regulations and things of that, maybe some NIL education, athlete sponsorships, athlete marketing. And that's kind of the world we'll be in today. So we're looking forward to it. And I guess just to start here, can you give the listeners and viewers maybe, kind of how do you find yourself working in a sports management industry, particularly focusing on NIL education and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, first off, thank you for having me, Connor. It's great to be on. Excited for the conversation. I went more of the education route at first, to be
Mhm.
honest. I did a master's in sport management, PhD in sport management. My doctoral research was on social media and the NBA. So I interviewed 7 NBA team social media directors on how they implemented, manage, evaluate social media. From there, as you know, that the sports industry is pretty tough to break into. So I was trying to, apply for the sports social media jobs, and it's, hey, come work for this team for $28,000 a year and compete against 700 applicants. And, so that didn't fare well for me, which is fine. But I parlayed that more into a general social media career. So I worked for IBM for 3 years on one of their corporate social media teams. I went to MetLife for 2 years and worked on their social media team. I went back to IBM for another couple of years and did chief of staff project management work. And then I went to Meta, which was formerly called Facebook, and I was a marketing manager there. Along the way, at all those companies, I helped their sports marketing teams with specific initiatives. So, at IBM, I helped them with, US Open for tennis and the Masters for golf. At MetLife, I helped them with the PGA Tour partnership. And then
Mhm.
at Meta, I helped their sports partnership team with their NIL Empower initiative. So this was a program that worked with 30 women college student athletes on NIL branding, engagement, how to get deals, post-career transition, et cetera. And I really, really liked the space. And, I just started honestly like going full force into the space. Like I just started reaching out to brands, agents, school NIL directors,
Yep.
anybody that was involved in NIL. So just like started reaching out and started doing my own work as well. My work at Meta ended, and then January of last year rolls around and I said, hey, I have enough time. Like, let me just spin something up in NIL. So, fast forward to today, I had 14 athletes on my roster, coast to coast, all Division 1, and they represent, basketball, track and field, tennis, golf, softball, men's and women's sports, et cetera. Write an NIL newsletter, which now comes out one time a week. I've shifted it to more of a personal branding NIL focus. I
Got it.
also work with a group of colleagues on NIL summits at HBCUs, so historically Black colleges and universities, to help move the NIL, initiative forward, and then do some other guest speaking, initiatives and things as well. So just trying to stay, busy in the space, along with personal branding for or NIL and personal branding for college athletic departments and athletes as well. So trying to stay active in multiple lanes within NIL.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I guess regarding one of those lanes, we'll dive into is kind of the agency side, the representation. So as you mentioned, you have 14 athletes across various sports along the Division 1 ecosystem there. So what goes into securing partnerships as you have with several notable brands?
Yeah, great question. It's a lot of legwork. It's a
Yeah.
lot of like reaching out, either cold emails, cold DMs, trying to find someone on LinkedIn, reaching out to them, convincing them. You get ghosted a lot of times, which is fine. Other times you get, oh, we don't have budget or we don't have a lot of money
Mhm.
for athlete partnerships. And then eventually you break through, right? It's just like, yeah, okay, we'll talk to you. Let me learn more about your athletes. Let me learn more about what you're working on. And you go from there, right?
Yep.
Whenever I pitch brands, it's one of two ways. Like one, I always ask the athletes, okay, what brands are you interested in? What things like, what kind of beverages are you interested in? Like, what are some local places? So then I can reach out to those specific brands for that specific athlete. Whenever I do general reach out, I will reach out on behalf of all my athletes. So, I'll pitch a
I see.
brand and I'll say, like, I have college athletes on my roster who I feel would be a good fit for a partnership. So, honestly, like I want to make sure like, everybody eats
Yeah.
essentially. So I try to be as agnostic as possible with that. of course, the brands will come back and say like, okay, we want to work with these 3 athletes or these 5 athletes, or you don't have anyone who's a good fit, maybe we'll check back with you later in the year. So that's generally how it is. So it's a lot of like work, a lot of reaching out and building the relationships from there and, turning them into partnerships down the road.
Right. And I think I guess or putting in the legwork, rather, building those relationships isn't more of, plant the seed and the tree will grow later type of approach, obviously in this specific space, but, doing partnership brand, reach out things and you work with brands like Raising Cane's and Charlie and others. So besides, obviously the athlete and the brand need to mesh. That's probably one of the most successful, things to go into a partnership. But other than that, between a student athlete and a brand, how do you make sure the alignment, lines up, or what are some other factors that go into that?
Yeah, you actually touched on that. You hit the money point. Essentially, it's like you want to make sure it's a good fit for the athlete, right? Because if it's something that, okay, is this something the athlete would truly use? Is this something they use in their regular life? Things like that. So you want to make sure it's a good fit for them because as both of us know, athletes will promote things and you can see right through them and like you can tell it's not genuine. It's
Yeah.
like they're just doing it for a paycheck. Like I know that that athlete doesn't care about whatever product they're pushing, right?
Uh-huh.
And so it's that, but then you also, I also want to make sure that the athlete just isn't spamming people, every week. Like I don't want it to be like, hey, after practice, like Gatorade is my favorite drink. And then the next week, hey, after practice, Powerade is my favorite drink. And then the
Right.
week after, hey, after practice, Body Armor is my favorite drink. Like that's very disingenuous too. So you want to make sure to do that. But yeah, again, to your point, it's like, is the athlete genuinely interested in the product? And is this something they would use regularly? Because it's just like anything, right? If you're genuinely interested in something, you're putting in a lot more effort into whatever it is in order to make that partnership happen. Even in life, it's like, if you're interested in, working out, you're going to put more effort into working out because you like it, not that you're forced to do it. So,
Mhm.
so again, yeah, it's all about the fit and making sure it's something good for the athlete and for the brand as well.
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the first things the brands that I've talked to kind of always ask is, especially now that NIL is kind of staying around, obviously it's been in the, I guess, industry for the past few years. And before that, that wasn't a thing clearly, but I think that's what brands have started to kind of, really dive in on is like, all right, is so and so athlete, do they actually like whatever the product is, or are you just reaching out because they want money? And so I think that's definitely one of the first things for all you, reaching out to companies and brands, like make sure you nail that down. Like, all right, yeah, Connor likes Body Armor. That's why we're reaching out to you. We're not just reaching out to you because, Connor wants $500 in his pocket or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, like you have to be careful about that too, right? It's just like, people, you may just making this up, but it's like, hey, I'm promoting Ben and Jerry's ice cream. It's like, hey, bro, aren't you lactose intolerant? Like, what's going on here? So it's just, but yeah, I agree. It's like, the genuine use and love of the product will make it better for everybody all
Yeah.
around.
I've said this before on the podcast in past episodes, but it reminds me of like LeBron James in a Mountain Dew commercial.
Mm,
When he's out there drinking, or the Sprite or whatever it is,
yeah.
you think to yourself, is he actually coming home after a game and knocking back a Sprite? I don't know. I find it hard to believe, but maybe he is. I don't know. I could be wrong. But it's
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I know LeBron is very much like a machine at this point, and what he puts
Yeah.
in his body is pretty careful. So yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's I guess kind of parlaying that into some of the sports court NIL newsletter you got. So that's obviously still within the NIL ecosystem. And you've, I guess in the past we've talked about kind of how you've built that up and your impressive open rate and click-through rate and things. So maybe share some insights into some strategies you employ to engage and kind of connect with your audience or future audience members that you're trying to attract.
Yeah, I think for the newsletter specifically, it's try to put out as best content as you can as possible, but then try to promote it as best you can as possible too, right? Because it's
Mhm.
like if you write a newsletter and you don't promote it, no one knows that you have a newsletter. You can have the best
Right.
content in the world, but if no one
Mhm.
knows about it, right? Like that's it. So it's like I try to cross promote it as much as possible. It's either on Instagram, mainly LinkedIn is where I
Mhm.
get, a lot of that from a little bit from Instagram and a little bit from Twitter/X as well.
Mhm.
So I use a platform called Beehive,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you're familiar with Matt Brown. He writes a
Mhm.
newsletter. It's called Extra Points, and he writes it like four
Okay.
times a
Yeah.
week. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he writes a newsletter 4 times a week, and I didn't even ask him to do this, but he's been doing me a solid. He's like, hey, like, I guess there aren't that many college sports related newsletters on Beehive. So he's been
Mhm.
actually like suggesting my newsletter to his readers in the newsletter. And I've actually been picking up a lot of subscribers from him. So Matt Brown, huge thank you. I owe you a lunch,
Shout out to Matt
next
Brown.
time, shout out to Matt Brown. I owe you lunch next time I see you. So, so it's a lot of that, but yeah, it's just a lot of, like it's a couple things, right? It's like one, it's promoting it so more people know about it, word of mouth, digital, but two, like you have to keep delivering on that content, right? Like keep writing, keep getting better, tweak, test, retest, A/B test, see what works, see what resonates with the audience, and then go from there. So it's, just like anything, it's a lot of trial and error.
Right. And then are there specific, obviously NILs is kind of what you talk about, but
Mhm.
um are there specific, trends or I guess upcoming maybe legal kind of court battles that are going on that you're keeping your eye on or your finger on here in the next few months or I guess years?
Yeah, I think like the NCAA went to Congress so many times last year, and things are starting to move along a little bit. But I think two big things I are keeping tabs on. One is for international student athletes. So
Mhm.
currently, any student athlete born outside the United States cannot fully monetize their NIL. A, I think that's a stupid reason. B, there are workarounds for this. There's like, an O1 visa they can fill out, compliance staff on hand at the university, lawyers, things like that. So there's a way around it, but it's so many hurdles for them to unnecessarily jump through
Yeah.
because of that. So, I think that's one. Two, I don't know if you saw, I think this past Monday, the NCAA approved that schools or colleges and universities can now solicit deals on behalf of athletes, which is
Yep.
huge. So the schools cannot pay the athletes, but they can solicit deals. So I think that's a big one, and you're going to start seeing a lot more of that. So now it's going to be interesting for agents, right? It's like, okay, if the schools can solicit deals for the athletes, like what value is the agent bringing? So now agents have to see like, okay, we have to be two steps ahead on what value we can bring the athletes. So I think that's going to be a big one. Those are probably going to be the two biggest ones. I could see kind of like an NIL or an agent database or directory coming through soon, where it's like, okay, you know, put your name in this database. It's a directory. You're certified. You're properly vetted and everything. So then that way athletes have reliable sources for them to reach out to, which I think could be helpful. So I could see some of those things coming, and then kind of off the top, on a related subject is I think that revenue sharing is coming soon, and I think
Mhm.
Power Five will essentially break off into its own super league pretty soon to do some revenue sharing and all that. But that's a topic for another podcast.
Yeah, no, I've talked about that with a few other I guess colleagues and those in the industry, and it seems like that's more than likely the road that will go down, and it makes I guess the most sense at where we're at now with all the things that have been in play. But you touched on kind of the NIL, I guess, agent registry or just registry in general. But
Mhm.
as yourself, you've got the I guess designation for NIL. Is it with Clean Connect, the NIL certification, and then also your sports athlete agent in New York, I believe it is.
Correct. Yeah. So two or three different ones. Yeah. One is a Clean Connect NIL, just education certification, which is great. A second one is through Front Office Sports, which is an NIL certification. And then three, yeah, to your point, I'm a certified athlete agent in 6 states. So how I like I prefer to do things the right way. So like whenever I'm in conversations with athletes on representation, if they agree to go through with it, I'll say, okay, let me become a registered athlete agent in your state first. Let me get my paperwork, and then we'll do the official like contract. Because when I talk to schools about representing their athletes, the first question they ask is, are you a registered athlete agent in our state? If not, you need to be registered. And so like I try to do things properly. I mean, it takes time. Some of these applications are kind of expensive. They can be, $100 to $300, each application. But the good thing is like A, it gives you a certification for a couple of years. B, it opens you up to represent any athlete in that state, right? So like as you mentioned that, I'm registered in New York. Okay, that's cool, but that's awesome. Now I can go represent Syracuse athletes or St. John's or Iona or whatever school I can now, same with other states. And three, like I don't want the athlete to be put in a bad situation through an
Mm.
agent that, has no certification, is just doing things willy-nilly, and then they get suspended or lose eligibility over like a $50 t-shirt deal or with some agent who didn't do things the right way. So, it's a little bit more work, a little bit more money, but I'd rather have that peace of mind for myself and the athlete. And then that way you build a good relationship with the school too, that, okay, this person's proper. And then maybe they recommend you to some of their other athletes as well.
Yeah. And I think kind of like we've touched on in the beginning, but kind of doing the groundwork when we were in respect to the brands and things like that, doing the legwork, but then also for the agents yourself, like being, I guess a licensed agent in 6 states, that goes a long way for the future clients and things like that to say, okay, he's the real deal. He's lined up. Everything makes sense here. And with those, I guess with those, agent, a lot of them are just forms. They're not like tests, right?
No,
Does it
no,
depend?
no, thankfully not. They're standard forms. So,
Mhm.
for any agents or future agents on the podcast. So it's actually good because like a lot of them will say like, okay, it'll say like, okay, I filled out one for North Carolina, filled it out, sent it in, and then I went to fill out one for Kentucky, and at the top of the application it said, if you filled out a similar application within the last 6 months, print that and mail it in instead of filling this out with a check. So I didn't have to go through and fill out all
Mm.
the same information. Mississippi was the same thing, and all that. So, so these are just, yeah, they're just applications, standard like name, where's your business? Are you committed felon? Give us some references, mail us your check. And it takes like 1 to 4 weeks for it to be approved. The testing part that you're talking about, that's if I wanted to become like an NFL agent or an NBA agent or a
Mhm.
FIBA agent, where it's like, okay, now you're representing contracts for players or doing contract negotiations, then you would need to take a test and pass that and pay a fee for that. So,
Mhm.
but to represent athlete agents just for marketing deals, there's no test required.
Yep, gotcha there. And then I guess kind of switching gears a little bit to the, I guess, education side, sports management, things like that. Obviously, you've done an extensive, you have an extensive background in that space with your schooling and things like that. But you touched on a little bit about the HBCU kind of events and different institutions you've worked with. So maybe just shed some light on what goes into that, maybe some future events that are coming up, and obviously the past events that you've conducted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the thing with that is it's the education is key, right? Because you work with athletes too. They're always like, "Can you give me a deal with Chipotle? How can I cash in on my NIL? This player got $400,000 from their collective. How can I get $600,000?"
Yeah.
Right? So, we take it like so many steps back and say like, okay, before you even do that, like you need to build a personal brand. You need to understand where the money goes. Do you have a bank account? Like, do you have some legal guidance that you need? So our seminars are generally kind of like very like 101 201 style, because it's like a lot of people see NIL at the 2%, but there's like the other 98% who aren't getting those big Nike deals or Gatorade or Red Bull or whatever it is. So we try to educate them on the ground as much as possible and let them know that, hey, you need to lay the foundation and the groundwork for your brand in order to build it. Like, I agree it's not fair, for a lot of these athletes, like, oh, that's the starting quarterback at this P5 school and they get all kinds of deals. Like, that's good for them, but you have to realize that's not you. But what you can do is like build up your personal brand so well that you can start having brands come to you. And then once you're done playing, it's going to last you for like the next 30, 40 years, like when you go into the
Right.
working world. So there's so much value in that. So, I think that's what we try to really focus on at the HBCUs. It's like, unfortunately, the HBCUs are smaller schools. They don't have a lot of the bigger opportunities
Mhm.
that P5s have or other, like mid-major schools have. So, we try to hone in on them like, hey, the education is key, the foundation is key. You have a good engaged audience, like start tapping into that. And that's what we do. We bring in like experts, whether they're personal branding experts or psychologists and like other, just like other like lawyers and financial professionals, et cetera. So we've done 2 summits so far. First one was at North Carolina A&T, and then the second one was at Norfolk State, which is in Virginia.
Mhm.
We just did one last week in Nashville, and then we have one coming up Monday, May 6th at Bowie State, which is in Bowie, Maryland. So that'll be 3 done, one upcoming, take a break over the summer, and then regroup for the fall and try to hit some more schools as well.
Got it. Very cool. Yeah, we're looking forward to that, and I guess we'll see maybe some more on LinkedIn and the social medias. But yeah, we'll shout that out there. And then you touched on it a little bit, but kind of on the education side and the personal branding side with, I guess, the rise of social media, you could say, in influencers and digital content creators. I guess how do you advise student athletes to leverage their personal brand online presence, while, I guess maintaining their NCAA, compliance with schools? I mean, what kind of goes into that? Because I feel like there's a lot that people just see athletes post, but there's a lot of behind the scenes, legwork that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I always tell the athletes is be consistent, right? Like ABC, always be consistent, right? Like always post content, right? Like be regular, but be strategic about your content and post on a
Mhm.
regular basis, right? It's just like, even if you set a cadence at once per week, it's like, okay, every Wednesday at 4 p.m., I'm going to post this game footage, practice footage, lifestyle photos, a partnership for NIL deal, et cetera. So the main thing I tell the athletes is be consistent. Like, make sure you're posting something regularly, because it's like, you're right, there's a lot of work that goes into it on the back end. And then when you post it, it's just like, it's one post, but you stick with it for a year and you have 50 plus pieces of content on multiple platforms that
Right.
you can use to leverage that brands can use. And like, okay, this person posts pretty regularly. We can get a sense of their personality, etc. Other things I tell them, pretty common sense things like, if you have music, make sure there are no foul language or cuss words, make
Mhm.
sure that before you post something, is it like, would my mom approve of me posting this? Like, I don't know. If not, then if there's any doubt, like, don't post it at all,
Yeah.
right? So do that, and stay consistent, right? It's like, do that. See what other content creators are posting too, right? It's like, wow, they're like this content creator does a lot of videos. Maybe I'll try Instagram Reels or TikTok videos as opposed to just pictures, and don't be afraid to mix it up too, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, try Reels, try TikTok, try Twitter, try, pictures, test it, retest, and then look at your, it's always tell them, look at your analytics and see what works well, and then make more of that content going forward.
Right. And I think especially with nowadays with whether it's TikTok or Instagram, I guess X and Twitter, they have analytics right there for you to look at. So you can just
Yeah.
see what's working, see what's not working. And that's all, very I guess beneficial, especially when brands ask, right?
Yeah.
Actually I'm curious about that. When brands ask, I'm usually ask about, the social media followers and count, but in your experience, have they ever asked, about the reach or the impressions on an average post, or do they, get granular like that?
Some brands do, I think that, you know, on the surface, they'll say like, okay, we want to work with athletes that have, 5,000 Instagram followers or 10,000 TikTok followers, whatever. But you do have some brands that will say like, okay, can you give me the athletes' engagement rate on their last 5 posts, or how many views are they getting on their videos, et cetera. So, some brands will do that, but a lot of them don't. But, it's a fair question to ask, because brands want to say like, okay, we only want to work with athletes that have engaging content, right? Because it's like,
Right.
you can have an athlete that has 50,000 followers, but if their engagement rate is only like 1%, that's not good. Where if you have an athlete with 2,500 followers and they're getting 20% engagement, that's where the money is right there.
Right.
So, yeah, but I mean, to be honest, at least the brands I work with, they don't get that granular. I think more so they're more so like, okay, what kind of presence do they have? Who's their audience? Things like that. And we go from there. But obviously, if they ever ask, I'm happy to provide them some of those metrics through the athlete.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I guess regarding kind of sports court consulting, your brand of business here, I guess what differentiates, your business, your plan, I guess future steps without obviously, giving away, trade secrets or whatnot. But how do you kind of envision, yeah, yourself and the company growing here in the future?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I feel that where I try to differentiate myself is that I offer NIL representation and personal branding, where it seems like a lot of companies will either just offer representation, or a lot of them will just offer branding and coaching, where I'd aim to
Mhm.
do both things. So, the goal is to continue to do both of those things. I want to work with more athletic departments on personal branding education for their student athletes. I did a seminar with ECU, East Carolina University. One of my
Mhm.
athletes plays basketball there. So I was able to do a Zoom seminar for one of their, or a group of their student athletes on personal branding. And I'd like to do more of that, right? Just like working with more athletic departments and working with conferences and things like that to provide that personal branding education for the athletes. And then on the representation side, I think it's along the lines of, working with the athletes and, trying to work, get a little bit bigger name athletes as well too, then hopefully with the hopes that they'll go pro, and then hopefully I can represent them at the next level as well. So, but always open to, working with athletes at all levels, and going from there. So, the goal eventually would be, yeah, to continue personal branding on the college athletic side, and then continue the representation, either if my own athletes go pro, or start working with higher level and professional athletes as well for marketing deals.
Yeah, no, and that's I guess very cool to see and to hear and to see kind of the next steps and evolution of, I guess, your personal brand and company. And touching on the, I guess, the education part with ECU is there, I guess, was obviously it was with personal branding, but what kind of went into that? Was it slideshow deck? There obviously probably examples of, things to do, things not to do. What did that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I met with the compliance director ahead of time and I said, okay, here's a shell of what I would like to present. It was just like 5 or 6 slides. And then he provided feedback saying, okay, our athletes ask about this quite a bit. Can you talk about this? And then
Mm,
one of the things I said, it's like, hey, our athletes want to know about NIL agents, like what to look for in an agent, what's the percentage they take, things like that. So then I inserted part of that as well. And then obviously, it's college students and, we all have short attention spans to an extent. So I try to make it as interactive as possible. So in the middle of the seminar or the webinar, like I said, okay, here's a personal branding hands-on session. Like you're going to go write your own personal brand statement. Like here's what I want to see. Here's what you need to consider. Take 5 minutes and do it. And then it's like, okay, who wants to share their personal brand statement? And so a couple people went around and shared their statement. So, try to do it like it was educational up front and then hands-on in the middle, and then the agent part of it at the end. So, because I think that's the value too, is like every school and every school's athletes want something different. So as long as you're in tune with what the school wants, then it makes it better for that presentation. It gives the most value.
right. Well, I think as you mentioned, in that answer there is you talk to the compliance officer, got to know a little bit of the background. That way you can go in with a tailored approach and say, okay, these specific athletes are looking at this, and this. I know where to attack, where to talk about. And that instead of just going in with, I guess a rote presentation and talking about the same thing that they've probably already heard before, right?
Exactly. Yeah, tailor it as much as possible. And to be honest, like some of the framework can be used throughout other presentations, but
Sure.
the specifics is really what matters. So that's what I feel brought the most value to them.
Right. Well, and I think that goes a long way to show kind of the product you provide and the resources available for student athletes. And I guess going forward, with the rise of, college sports and potentially the break off and whatnot, do you see a specific sport or sector within sports that you think is maybe untapped regarding NIL representation?
Yeah, 100% hockey, absolutely
Okay.
hockey. So yeah, I think that they're really primed for success in the NIL space because it's like they have very engaged fan bases. They have really good athletes, and it's just, I mean, like everybody focuses on football and basketball and all these
Mhm.
other sports, but I think like hockey is gonna be a big one for sure. So as a secondary, I would say track and field, like maybe because I'm like a big track and field fan, but I could see like there's a lot of potential there because if you look at a track and field roster, it's some schools have like 100
Right.
athletes on the roster. So like these rosters are massive, right? So like there's so much untapped potential, and also track and field has men's and women's athletes on the same team. Plus, if you rope in cross country, like there's a lot of work there. But I'm sticking with hockey first, and then track and field second.
All right, good to hear. So hot, that sounds like we'll keep our eyes on those two
Yeah.
sectors going forward. And then before we conclude, we just want to give you the floor and maybe touch on, I guess, your newsletter or anything that we haven't touched on already, and promote any events or athletes, I guess promotions or things like that coming up.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, you can message me on LinkedIn. Happy to I pretty much accept every single connection request that comes in, even if it feels salesy, I'll still accept it. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn there. Website is sportscourt.info, sportscourt.info. And then I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok as well. So those are all some variation of sports court as well. So most of my content goes on the social media channels, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, specifically video content 2 to 3 times a week. LinkedIn, I generally post once per week, usually more text-based content. And then I had my website as well. So anyone interested in personal branding, uh, coaching or guidance for athletes or for schools, please message me. And then if you need any NIL representation, I'm open to those conversations. You can contact me by email also at Tariq, Tariq, at sportscourt.info. So some places to be found. So happy to at least have those initial conversations. And then
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, and then the newsletter as well is sportscourt.beehive.com, beehiiv.com. So Please subscribe. It's free. I mentioned, I used to write it 3 times per week, more like news story based, and I've actually switched it to once per week. Actually, the first new newsletter came out today. More of a shift to like NIL and personal branding for athletes. So like some of the things we talked about earlier today. So you can find me there, and yeah, we're always happy to connect.
Appreciate it. Yeah, that's great. We'll link those in the bio and when we roll out this episode here in the future. So thanks for stopping by today and shedding some light on the personal branding side of things, NIL, sports representation, all that. So we'll publish this episode on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, where you get your podcasts. And thanks again, Tariq. And we're looking forward to watch your work. And like you said, be sure to visit Sports Court Consulting at the listed websites below when we will drop them. So thanks again, and we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Thank you, Connor. This is great.
Yep.